He tore it in front of everyone. The sound was absurdly loud in the quiet of the branch, a single crisp rip that scattered the promise on the paper like leaves in wind. People looked up from their phones and their paperwork. Some laughed, some smiled the way people smile when a stranger's misfortune feels safe to enjoy. The ripped check fluttered to the floor. The manager, hands still trembling with the gesture, pushed the pieces toward the trash can as if they were nothing at all. An 11-year-old girl stood at the counter, mud on the hem of her pants, a smear of playground dust across one cheek, her hair pulled into a crooked ponytail. Her fingers were tightly curled around the strap of a worn backpack. For a moment she did not move. Her eyes were the kind of clear, steady thing that stops a room. Then she turned and walked away, the chuckles following like gutter water. You'll want to hear what happens next, because nothing about that branch would ever be the same. If you love true-to-heart stories, subscribe. One click keeps you close to more like this. Carla had been at the park that morning until the grass went from damp to dry under her sneakers. She had chased a ball with a kid 2 streets over, had lost and found a bracelet of plastic beads, had eaten a popsicle until sticky. The check she carried was a birthday gift from her grandmother, a sizable check meant to be deposited into the little account she had been given for safekeeping. It was important to Carla mostly because it was a promise of a new bike maybe, or of saving toward the school trip she had been eyeing. It had also been folded into the same envelope as a napkin she had used to wipe her hands, which would explain the faint smudge at the corner of the paper. Carla's parents, Lucas and Rita, had built that bank from a single office and a stubborn belief in doing things differently. They were not the kind of owners who hid behind boardroom glass. They taught their daughter how to tie her shoes, how to carry her own grocery bag, how to stand straight when someone tried to belittle her. They had chosen simplicity for her childhood because they believed, stubbornly, that wealth should not shelter a child from the reality of the world. Character, Rita liked to say, doesn't come from tidy hands. It comes from the work of being human. Which is why Carla sometimes ran small errands by herself. On that day, she had been sent with clear instructions. Stand in line, hand the check to the teller, wait until the deposit is confirmed. Mrs. Beatrice, Carla's grandmother, had pressed the envelope into her palm with a wink. Nothing fancy, she had said, just be careful. The branch was one of many under the family's name, Hearthbridge, a name Lucas and Rita had picked because it sounded like a place you could cross when you needed to be somewhere safe. The lobby smelled of lemon cleaner, the soft musk of coffee, and the indistinct perfume of 100 daily lives.
Clerks typed. A small boy at a low table gnawed on a cookie. A woman on an electric scooter wheeled herself toward the accessible counter. The bank felt ordinary in every harmless way, until it didn't. At the counter, a teller took the envelope with a practiced smile. Fernanda, young and careful, scanned the checks and called their amount into the system. Behind her, the branch manager, Paolo, came forward to help. He was the kind of man whose uniform had the exact right crease and whose laughter landed like a metronome. That morning, he wore confidence like armor and impatience like a secondary badge. He looked at Carla, at the mud on her shoes and the napkin crease on the check, and made a choice. It was a small thing, a voice inflection loaded with contempt. "This check looks odd," he announced to the room, loud enough for the security camera and loud enough for the waiting customers. He tilted his head, took the paper, and held it up as if presenting a curiosity. "Is that her name?" someone asked, soft. Community curiosity more than malice. Paolo smiled a smile that was almost a sneer. "It's obviously a novelty." He turned the check between his fingers, studied it as if it were counterfeit art. People's eyes followed him, hungry for the drama of spectacle. And then, in a moment that felt both thunderous and small, he tore the paper down the middle. The sound cut through the hum of the branch. Pieces of the check fluttered. A fragment slid unnoticed under a chair. He pushed the shreds into the wastebasket as if disposing of something insignificant. Carla froze, heat rushing to her face. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She picked up the straps of her backpack and left the building with the same steady gait she had used to cross the playground field. She walked past people who had been entertained. She walked past the door as if pulling the same air as before. But she felt the look of the room on her neck, and that look felt like a scale tipping. Outside, the air was sharp with late summer. An older woman who had seen the scene from the scooter rose and followed Carla across the sidewalk. "Honey," she called, "are you okay?" The girl shook her head and clutched the envelope, now terribly empty, in her hand.
Tears came later in the backseat on the way home, while the radio played a song her parents liked. Lucas and Rita handle affronts the way they handle mismanaged accounts, with controlled attention. They did not call the manager in to shout. They did not show up on social media to make a spectacle. They listened to the recording on the branch camera at 2 in the afternoon together in their living room, both of them quiet, hands clasped. The tape was crisp. The rip echoed in their ears. Lucas's jaw tightened, and then loosened with an old practiced breath. "We're not going to make this about how much money she had," Lucas said. His voice was flat, a tone parents use when they are more scared than angry.
"This is about how we teach people to treat others." Rita nodded. "We teach with actions, not with words." She looked at her daughter's small, sleeping face beside her. "She doesn't need a crusade. She needs dignity returned." They did exactly what the situation required. They collected evidence, they documented, and they requested a meeting with branch leadership. They also called in a trusted lawyer for counsel, not to litigate in the courts for spectacle, but to make sure the institution's internal processes could be enforced. They wanted accountability, yes, but also an opportunity for the bank to correct itself rather than hide behind an apology in the press. That was the beginning of the reckoning. The next morning, the staff were called into a meeting under the pretext of procedural review. The room smelled like coffee and stiff paper. A projector lent a clean rectangle of light on the wall, and one by one, images from the lobby camera flickered in grainy motion. The room watched itself. The recording showed the way the manager had smiled at the torn check. It showed the way the chatter in the lobby had turned into a chorus. It showed the girl in the mud, and then the final step through the door. Lucas stood up to speak. He did not raise his voice. He let the silence of the room collect around him. "Respect," he began, "is not a favor. It is the baseline. We work in service to people. That means we treat every person who walks through our door as if they matter, because they do." He did not mention ownership or power. He did not press the weight of the law on their collars. Instead, he pressed on the conscience of the assembled bank staff. He talked about dignity. He talked about role modeling. He asked them to imagine their own children in a chair with mud on their shoes, a slip of paper in trembling hands. "Imagine how you'd want your child to be treated," he said. "That should not be imagination. That should be our practice." Then they showed the video again, frame by careful frame. The manager's hands. The moment the check tore. The sound that had felt so casual now read like a violation. People shifted in their seats. Some avoided looking at the wall. Others fixed their eyes on the footage as if it could offer confession. When the lights came back on, Paolo's face looked smaller somehow. He had always believed himself to be beyond the smallness of embarrassment through the shield of rank. Confronted with his own image, measured, arrogant, unkind, he flinched. Fernanda, the teller who had handed the check to him, had sat silent throughout the replay. She watched the younger customers and the elderly together and felt a weight in her chest that was new and hot. Her eyes found Lucas's, and she saw not only disappointment, but an invitation to do better. She cleared her throat, a small, fearful sound. I should have stepped him," she said. "I didn't. I was embarrassed. I'm sorry."
Carla's parents had wanted dignity returned without spectacle, but they also wanted truth. They had come for an apology, for remedies, for internal changes that would prevent an identical cruelty from happening again. The board, convening after the assembly, made decisions that walked the line between accountability and humanity. The manager was dismissed from his role at the branch. He was offered a severance arrangement typical of such internal corporate separations, material closure without theatrics. Others implicated directly in encouraging the derision were disciplined or reassigned. At the same time, the bank's leadership committed to a practical program, mandatory customer service and empathy training, revised front-of-house policies that prioritized respect over optics, and a system for immediate review whenever a staff complaint crossed certain lines. There was no grand public shaming. No one invented criminal charges where none existed. The bank's internal decision was firm but measured. Consequences with structural changes to prevent recurrence. The manager, Paulo, walked out of the branch that afternoon with a box of personal things and a face that had learned how quickly a chair can warm one and then leave one cold. He did not disappear into ruin. He took his severance, on paper a small mercy, and stepped into quieter work, a municipal office where the uniform had fewer stripes and fewer witnesses to admire. There, removed from the glow of corporate ego, he learned how small acts matter. A child walked into his new office one rainy afternoon, hair plastered to her forehead, clutching a crumpled permission slip. Paulo helped tape it flat. He listened. He complimented the child's determination. The compliment was awkward at first, like a man relearning a language, but each day the words came easier. Fernanda, on the other hand, found the meeting to be a pivot point. She could have stayed safe in the rhythm of transaction and avoidance, but what hurt her could also be the seed of change. She enrolled in a short course in customer psychology and later transferred to a different branch that needed mentoring and human-facing service. She became the one who noticed the kids in muddy shoes and offered a quiet, understanding smile. Carla did not become an icon. She remained a little girl who loved the park. She came to the bank now with a parent, sometimes with Rita, sometimes with Lucas, and sometimes with both, just to watch how the world looked when you walked into it comfortably. On one rainy Tuesday, she stood in line with her mother and noticed an elderly gentleman fumbling with his wallet at the counter. Without thinking, she stepped forward, steady as the girl who once walked past the same counter with torn paper in her hands. She reached down, helped him lift the coins he had dropped, and slid his wallet back into his coat. The old man smiled at her like someone who had been returned a small, forgotten thing. Rita watched her from a distance and felt something settle in her chest, the way a parent feels when the lesson takes root without trumpets. "We wanted her to know how to carry herself," she said later, fingers laced in Lucas's. "Not just wealth. We wanted character." The media didn't turn the branch into a headline for long. The story that could have become a rabid spectacle remained in most corners, a cautionary tale repeated in hushed tones among staff. The bank implemented the training they had promised, scenarios, role plays, protocols that emphasized respectful questioning over contempt. Leaders were given tools to de-escalate, to recognize bias, to pause before joining a room's laughter. The changes were not miraculous. They were incremental and stubborn. People learned new behaviors because the institution required them, and because a public figure, albeit quietly, had insisted on it. There were other ripples too, softer and less tidy. Some customers who had once felt invisible began to notice staff's effort to be kinder. A younger teller began bringing a small stack of pencils and crayons to the children's table. A security guard learned to speak in a lower, gentler pitch when dealing with nervous customers. Systems changed their small, ingrained habits, and slowly the branch's mood shifted. The fired manager found work that offered no crown but required humility. He learned to be kinder, not for a press release or for a board meeting, but because the only applause he would ever truly earn now would be human and immediate. Years later, a woman who recognized him from his old branch came into his small office carrying a child with scuffed shoes. He fixed the child's shoelaces without comment. He leaned down and said, "Nice work getting here today." The woman thanked him with a look that held no history beyond the present. Paulo felt something uncoil inside him. It was not redemption calculated for effect. It was a slow, private education. Carla grew. She continued to be called dirty by the careless, and brave by a handful of adults who liked tidy narratives. Mostly she was simply herself, a child who loved to swing high enough to feel like she might fly, and who stashed a small notebook where she drew the trees at the park. The bank's culture was different now when she walked in. Not perfect, but different. People who had once laughed more readily than they listened now hesitated, then chose listening. The central seam of the story is not the payroll or the meeting minutes. It is smaller and fiercer: dignity. Lucas would tell anyone who asked that what happened to his daughter was a wound to their family precisely because it was a wound to the bank's promise to serve. He told staff that the real value of their business was not in the vaults, but in the way they honored one another. Money, he said once to a room full of employees, buys paper. It should never buy permission to belittle.
Carla's question, asked in the calm of the assembly after the video had been shown, landed like a bell. "Would you have apologized if you hadn't known who I was?" The room went still. It's an awful and simple thing to ask, because it strips a person of plausible deniability. It reframes humility as something owed to every person, regardless of status. The question stayed with them. What followed was not cartoon justice, no dramatic courtroom fight, no public show trials. There were firings and severances, yes, and a structured program of reform. There were personal crossroads for people like Fernanda and Paulo. And there was a community that had to decide how it would treat the small, awkward people who make up the daily world. Months later, in a quiet moment at the park, Carla handed a small bead bracelet to a boy who had fallen and scraped his knee. He looked at the bright colors, then at her, and grinned. "Thanks," he said. Later, in line at the branch, she saw the same old man whose wallet she had helped before. He nodded at her like an old anchor.
The bank doors opened and closed around dozens of ordinary lives, some hurried, some careful, some exhausted. Staff wore the new training like freshly ironed sleeves, one more habit in a long day. The changes did not make the world fair. They made it, slightly more often, kinder. There is a lesson here that is not meant to be profound. It is simple. Respect is not a totem you award to those who can pay for it with prestige or power. It is the baseline of being human. The parents' choice to raise their daughter away from privilege did not mean hiding her from harm. It meant giving her a chance to meet harm and come away with a clearer sense of what matters, that people are more important than the balances in their accounts. If you see someone small in the world, someone in muddy shoes, someone who looks different from the tidy images we prefer, ask yourself, would I treat them the same if I didn't know their name? It's a hard question, and it's also the one that matters most. If this story touched you, share a moment when someone surprised you with kindness, or when you learned to be kinder yourself in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and share with someone who needs to hear that respect is not optional.